On a quiet summer afternoon, at a lonely roadside fuel stop, a weary single father crosses paths with a woman whose eyes hide more than tears. Beside her sits a silent child, his small feet swinging as if carrying the weight of a secret too heavy to speak. In that moment, a simple choice will set off a chain of events neither of them could imagine. A moment that will change their lives forever. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And tell us where you are watching from. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. So drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Now, let's jump into the story. It was late afternoon in the heart of summer, the kind of golden hour that made even the quietest corners of the countryside glow. The small fuel stop sat on the side of a two-lane road, its pumps standing like patient sentries under a sky so wide it felt endless. For most drivers passing through, this was just another place to fill a tank before heading somewhere else. For Michael Roberts, it would become the setting for a moment that would change everything. Michael had spent the day at the repair shop where he worked, fixing engines and patching up tires under the heavy sun. He was a man in his late 30s, his shoulders broad from years of labor, his face marked with the quiet lines of responsibility. Being a widowed father meant he carried more than just tools in his hands. He carried the weight of providing for his young daughter, Lily, and the determination to keep her world steady. As he stepped out of his old pickup, the hum of the engine softened, leaving only the gentle chirp of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the warm breeze. He began fueling the truck, the click of the pump a steady rhythm in the stillness. Sweat rolled down his neck, his shirt clinging to his back. The kind of tired he felt wasn't just from the day's work. It was the deep fatigue that settled into the bones after years of doing everything alone. While watching the fuel gauge slowly climb, Michael noticed movement in the corner of his eye. A few yards away, near the far pump, stood a young woman. She was leaning against the side of an aging sedan, her light brown hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She wore a pale dress that caught the sunlight, but there was nothing light in the way she stood. Her hand covered her face, her shoulders drawn in, trembling slightly as if she were holding back tears. Michael's gaze shifted to the back of her car. The trunk was open, and a small suitcase sat inside as if it had been packed in a hurry. On the edge of the open trunk sat a boy, no older than 7 or 8, his legs dangling above the ground. He wasn't playing or talking. He was staring down at his shoes, the tips of his sneakers brushing against each other in a slow, restless rhythm. Michael recognized that expression instantly. It was the look of a child trying to be brave, while the world around them felt uncertain. He had seen that same expression in Lily's eyes after her mother passed away. The quiet, heavy sadness that a child shouldn't have to know. Something inside him shifted. It might have been the memory of nights when he'd sat with Lily in the dark, trying to convince her everything would be all right. Or maybe it was just the stubborn part of him that couldn't stand to see someone struggling without offering a hand. He didn't plan what he was going to say. He didn't stop to consider whether he should get involved. He simply let the pump click off, returned the nozzle to its place, and began walking toward her. As he got closer, the details sharpened. Her fingers were pale, her knuckles tight as she pressed them against her face. Her breathing came in short, uneven bursts, and when she looked up briefly, her eyes were red. The boy glanced at Michael for a moment before looking back down quickly. As if afraid to meet the gaze of a stranger, Michael slowed his steps, not wanting to startle her. His voice was low and steady when he finally spoke, asking if she was all right. She shook her head almost immediately, her lips pressed tightly together, trying to form words that wouldn't come. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to fade. No sound of passing cars, no hum of machines, just the quiet weight of a moment that felt fragile. Michael didn't know her name, and she didn't know his. But in that instant, they both understood something important. Sometimes the people who step into your life when you least expect it are the ones who leave the deepest mark. As the wind moved through the open lot, carrying the scent of gasoline and sun-warmed asphalt, Michael realized this was not just a passing scene to witness and walk away from. It was a turning point, one that neither of them could see yet, but one that would ripple far beyond this quiet roadside meeting. He stood there, ready to listen, ready to offer whatever help he could, not knowing that what began as a small act of compassion would set in motion a series of events that would change both of their lives forever. Michael stood quietly, waiting for the young woman to find her voice. The late summer light painted the edges of the fuel station in soft gold, but the weight in the air felt heavy. He could see the struggle on her face, the way her eyes darted down as if speaking her truth might make it too real. She finally lowered her hand from her face and took a deep breath. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as she introduced herself as Emma. She explained that her car had run out of gas just as she pulled in, but the fuel problem was only the surface of something bigger. Michael listened without interrupting. Emma's words came in small pieces, as though she was giving away parts of a story she wasn't ready to tell in full. She said she had left home in a hurry that morning, taking her son Oliver with her. There was no clear plan and nowhere certain to go. Michael didn't ask about the reasons. He didn't need to. The quiet ache in her voice and the guarded look in her eyes spoke volumes. As they talked, Oliver shifted on the trunk of the car. His small hands clutched the edge for balance, his eyes occasionally lifting to watch his mother before returning to the ground. Michael noticed the boy's shoes, scuffed and worn, and it made him think about the way children silently carry the weight of situations they don't fully understand. Michael knew he didn't have much to give. His wallet held just enough for the week's groceries, fuel for his truck, and maybe a small treat for Lily if the budget allowed. But he also knew that walking away without helping was something he couldn't do. He nodded toward Emma's car and said simply, "Let's fill your tank." She started to protest, shaking her head and insisting she couldn't take his money. But Michael's tone left no room for argument. He walked to his truck, reached into the glove compartment for the last spare cash he had, and slid the pump nozzle into her fuel tank. Emma stood nearby, watching in silence, her hands fidgeting. The sound of the fuel flowing was steady, almost calming. Michael kept the conversation light, asking where she planned to head next. She hesitated before answering, saying she thought she might drive to a nearby town where an old friend lived, but she wasn't sure if she would be welcome. When the tank was full, Michael reached into the cooler in the back of his truck. He pulled out a cold bottle of water and handed it to Emma. Then, without thinking twice, he took out the sandwich he had packed for his own dinner and offered it to her. "You'll need something for the road," he said, his voice steady and kind. Her lips parted as if to refuse again, but this time she simply nodded and took it. There was a long pause between them, not an uncomfortable silence, but one heavy with unspoken gratitude. Emma's eyes shimmered as she told him she would pay him back one day. Her voice trembled on the words, as though she was trying to hold back emotion. Michael shook his head and told her there was no debt. He said the only thing she needed to focus on was keeping herself and her son safe. Oliver finally looked up, studying Michael's face for a long moment. There was a flicker of trust there, the kind of silent connection that doesn't need words. Michael smiled faintly, giving the boy a small nod before stepping back toward his truck. They exchanged a brief goodbye, the kind that felt unfinished, like there was still more to be said. As Michael started the engine and pulled away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw Emma leaning down to say something to Oliver, the boy looking up at her with an expression that was softer than before. On the drive home, the image stayed with him, the quiet strength in Emma's voice despite her fear, the boy's watchful eyes, the way a stranger's pain had stirred something deep in him. Michael didn't know if he would ever see them again. He didn't know if his small gestures, a full tank of gas, a bottle of water, a sandwich, would make much of a difference. But he hoped in some way that they might. As he pulled into his driveway and cut the engine, the house looked just as it always did. Modest, a little worn, but filled with memories. Lily's laughter drifted from the backyard, pulling him back into the rhythm of his own life. Yet somewhere in the quiet spaces of his mind, a thought lingered. Sometimes the smallest kindnesses are the ones that carry the most weight. Michael didn't realize it yet, but this brief encounter was only the first thread in a story that was far from over. And the road ahead would bring him face to face with something far greater than he could imagine. The next day began like any other for Michael. The morning sun cast a soft light across his small kitchen as he poured coffee into a chipped mug. Lily sat at the table, swinging her feet as she worked through a bowl of cereal, talking about a school project she was excited to start. It was an ordinary, quiet moment, the kind that Michael valued in his life, steady, simple, and predictable. By mid-afternoon, Michael was outside in his driveway, working on a neighbor's truck. The steady clink of tools and the familiar smell of motor oil filled the air. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, tightening the last bolt before stepping back to check his work. That was when he heard it, the sound of footsteps approaching. A shadow stretched across the ground, and Michael turned to see Emma standing just beyond the hood of the truck. Oliver was with her, holding onto her hand. She looked different from the day before, still tired, still carrying a quiet weight, but there was something in her eyes now that hadn't been there before. It was a faint, steady light, like someone who had found a small piece of hope. "Emma," Michael said softly, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you again." She offered a small smile and lifted an envelope she had been holding. Her fingers turned it over and over, as if she wasn't quite sure how to hand it to him. "I came to thank you," she said, "and to ask if you'd come with me for a few minutes." Michael started to shake his head, saying there was no need to thank him, but Emma's tone was gentle and insistent. She said it wasn't just about the fuel or the sandwich. It was about what it had meant to be seen and helped when she had nothing left to hold on to. After a moment's hesitation, Michael wiped his hands on a rag, called to Lily to let her know he'd be back soon, and followed Emma and Oliver to her car. The drive was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the spaces between them. Michael looked out the window, wondering where they were going, but didn't ask. About 15 minutes later, they turned onto a small street just outside of town. It was lined with tall trees that swayed in the warm afternoon breeze. Halfway down the street, Emma pulled over in front of a modest, freshly painted single-story home. The white siding gleamed in the sunlight, and a small porch with 2 wooden chairs faced the road. A for sale sign stood planted in the grass, its bright colors catching Michael's eye. He stepped out of the car, confused, as Emma walked toward the porch. She reached into her bag and pulled out a set of keys. "This is for you," she said, holding them out. Michael stared at the keys, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. "I don't understand," he said. Emma took a deep breath before explaining. She told him she had received unexpected help from someone she trusted, which gave her the means to buy this house. But instead of keeping it for herself, She wanted Michael and Lily to have it. Michael shook his head, stepping back. "I can't accept something like this," he said firmly. ... Emma's voice softened. "You gave me more than gas and a sandwich. You gave me dignity in a moment when I felt invisible. You showed my son that there are still people who care without expecting anything in return. I want to give you this because it's not just a house. It's a place where you and Lily can rest, a place that's yours." Her words settled heavily in the air. Michael thought about all the years of stretching every dollar, the quiet nights of worry, the sacrifices no one else saw. He thought about how many times he had wished for a little more stability, a place where Lily could grow up feeling safe. Still, the idea felt impossible. Yet as he looked at the small home, with its freshly painted door and inviting porch, something inside him shifted. Maybe it wasn't about deserving it. Maybe it was about accepting that sometimes life gives back in ways you can't predict. Michael stood there in silence, the keys still in Emma's outstretched hand, not yet realizing that this moment was about to mark the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Michael stood on the porch of the small house, the keys still resting in Emma's open palm. The warm afternoon light stretched across the yard, turning the grass into soft shades of gold. It felt like time had slowed, the quiet holding them in place. He searched for words, but found none that seemed enough. All he could think about was Lily, how she had grown up in rented spaces, never staying long enough to plant roots. How every move meant explaining why they had to leave, and promising her that someday things would be different. "I don't know what to say," he admitted finally, his voice low. Emma gave a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to say anything, just take it." He closed his hand around the keys, feeling their weight. It wasn't just the metal he felt. It was the weight of possibility. Over the next week, Michael and Lily moved into the house. It wasn't big, but it was theirs. The living room smelled faintly of fresh paint. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window in the morning, spilling over the old wooden table that would soon be covered with homework papers and dinner plates. Lily claimed the smaller bedroom and spent hours arranging her books and hanging drawings on the wall. For the first time, Michael saw her settle into a space as if she knew she would wake up in the same room for years to come. Life slowly began to take on a new rhythm. Michael still worked long days at the repair shop, but he came home with a lighter heart. He found himself fixing up the porch in the evenings, sanding the railings, and repainting the chairs. Lily would sit on the steps, talking about her day, while the warm wind carried the scent of cut grass. Emma visited a few times during those first weeks, bringing small things for the house, a potted plant for the kitchen, a set of mugs, a blanket for the couch. Each time, she stayed long enough to share a cup of tea and watch Lily run barefoot in the yard. Eventually, Emma told Michael she was leaving town to start over somewhere new. She didn't say exactly where, only that she and Oliver had a chance at a fresh beginning. They promised to keep in touch, and for a while they did. Letters at Christmas, quick phone calls in the spring. As seasons passed, the house became more than just shelter. It became a place where Michael and Lily hosted neighbors for summer barbecues. A place where the sound of laughter filled the rooms. Winter evenings were spent by the small fireplace, with the two of them wrapped in blankets, sharing stories and hot cocoa. Michael often thought about the chain of events that had led them here. A quiet roadside meeting, a simple act of kindness, and a gift that had reshaped their lives. He carried that story like a reminder in his heart. You never know how far a small moment of compassion can travel. Years later, Lily grew into a young woman with the same steady kindness her father had shown that day at the fuel station. After finishing school, she started a small community program that helped travelers who found themselves stranded, offering fuel, food, or a place to rest. When people asked her why she started it, she would smile and tell them about the day her father stopped to help a stranger, not knowing that one act would change everything. On a warm evening, years after that meeting, Michael sat on the porch of the house, now a little weathered but still full of life. Lily had just finished her weekly community run, and as she came up the steps, he saw the same light in her eyes that he had once seen in Emma's, the light of someone who had felt the power of kindness and was passing it forward. They sat together in the fading light, not needing to speak. The hum of crickets filled the air, and the porch creaked softly beneath their feet. Michael thought about how the house had started as a gift, but had become something much larger, a place where kindness grew, where new beginnings were built, and where a father and daughter learned that life's most powerful changes often begin with a simple decision to care. And in that quiet moment, under the same wide sky that had watched over their first meeting with Emma, Michael understood something deeply. The good you put into the world has a way of finding its way back to you, often when you least expect it, and often in ways you could never imagine.